Well, I tend to agree with the Israeli position that it's a ridiculous proposal that Britain under Keir Starmer has come up with. I think, if anything, Palestinian statehood being recognised ought to be conditional not on the actions of the State of Israel, but on the actions of the Palestinians. And I think, to that end, we can't forget what happened on October the 7th, but also for decades before then, through countless acts of terrorism which have taken so many lives, being blown up in buses, in pizzerias, in nightclubs, stabbings, rammings, and the list goes on. So I think that the idea of Keir Starmer using recognition of statehood, of Palestinian statehood, as a punishment for Israel is a preposterous idea that doesn't just fly in the face of common sense with Israel, but also flies in the face of common sense with the whole idea of what statehood and sovereignty is. I just don't think it should be used in that way. And I think that he's doing this in order to satisfy or placate or appease the very worst parts of the British electorate and indeed parts of the parliamentary Labour Party. And again, I think that's going to go very badly for him in the future. So overall, I think it encourages and rewards terrorism. I think that will be seen by terrorists around the world and around the Middle East. And I think it encourages and rewards some of the worst parts of his constituencies, his voters, and indeed of his own MPs.
We're in a situation, Jonathan, where Israel has condemned this, where, as you would expect them to, the Americans have condemned this. Do you see greater fissures emerging between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump? It was, of course, only Monday where the two men had a rather large in-person discussion on many, many issues, and then the next day we're told that there's to be recognising of Palestine. We also have the conditions that are put on this by Keir Starmer. I mean, my thought would be, I disagree with it in principle, as you can imagine I do, but my thought would be, if you really believe this should happen, just do it. Why would you put conditions on Israel or anybody? Why not just do it if you think it's the right thing to do?
Well, more than that, the conditions he put on it are really weird, because he says that he wants these conditions there in order to try to push things forwards for making some kind of imaginary, peaceful two-state solution between the two parties. Now, that's obviously quite a peculiar response to October the 7th, 2023, and the month since then, because I think that was probably the moment most Israelis realised the fantasy of a two-state solution was one that they'd nurtured only amongst themselves. After all, the Palestinians, under pretty much every possibility they were offered for having a state, have turned it down. And then that culminated in this hideous act of terrorism and barbarism on the 7th of October. So even putting that aside, he says that he wants a ceasefire in the current war that's going on in Gaza. And so if Israel can't achieve a ceasefire by September, he's going to recognise Palestinian statehood. But Israel's already agreed to the ceasefire agreements brokered by Egypt, Qatar and the US. It's Hamas that hasn't agreed to them. So now he's incentivised Hamas.
There is absolutely no incentive for Hamas to have any sort of ceasefire in regard to this British action.
That's exactly right, because he said, come September, if there's no ceasefire in place, I'm going to give you a recognition of statehood. So the Palestinians are laughing. You've got Hamas saying, OK, we're going to keep torturing and probably killing and starving these 20 hostages who are still alive that they seized. I mean, just think of the brutality of their treatment for so long, almost 2 years being kept hostage. Then they're going to simply just dig their heels in. It's going to slow down or stop any negotiations for a ceasefire, because the reward for that on the part of Britain will be recognition of a Palestinian state, which will then strengthen and embolden Hamas. Because even in the rotten mainstream political system of the Palestinians, the so-called moderates aren't that great either. But Hamas are going to be the ones who can turn to the Palestinian street and say, well, we achieved this, and we achieved it through violence and terrorism and rejectionism. So I think that all round, it's such a bizarre and daft policy that it's hard to believe that even this government is so stupid that it actually thinks it would work. So one can't help but think that's not really the true reasoning behind it, and they just
I think you're right, Jonathan. I think we're right to be cynical about this. I think this is a lot more to do with the rebellion over the welfare bill than it is to do with anything that has happened in the Middle East. I also wonder, I mean, I'm reluctant to even read out these statistics because they are from Hamas terrorists, but we are told by the Hamas-run health ministry, which is, of course, Hamas terrorists are telling us this, so we always have to be really cautious about any statistics they tell us. They allege that 104 people have been killed in the last 24 hours. They talk about 7 more deaths from malnutrition. What is absolutely clear is that there is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. I don't think anybody can in all honesty, deny that. But how does this in any way help those people? That's my question, because Keir Starmer, to me, is doing something that's performative rather than something that actually goes to the heart of this issue, which is to deal with the humanitarian crisis, to bring peace to the region, and to make sure that Hamas have absolutely nothing to do with those people's lives in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really complex one to do briefly, but the point is that aid getting into the Gaza Strip is a really difficult challenge. In the past, it's been administered by UN bodies, other aid bodies in the Strip, but they've been infiltrated and corrupted by Hamas and other terrorist groups who have stolen the aid, sold it when it was meant to be free, and then used that money to blackmail or pay people to continue being Hamas fighters and also to continue generally being part of the Hamas machine. So the Israelis and the Americans tried to replace that system with this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which has come under a lot of criticism for its shortcomings, but it has been trying to break that stranglehold of Hamas. And so in recent days, we have seen these images coming out of Gaza and these statistics that you mentioned. We have absolutely no way of knowing how accurate they are, only to say that they are coming from Hamas-controlled bodies. And so they are almost certainly exaggerated and they are almost certainly lies in certain parts. But of course, there is bound to be some form of suffering and shortage after so much time in the Gaza Strip of war, especially when Hamas still has this hold on power. And Hamas is ruthless. It will sacrifice its own people. I mean, if it came to it, I'm sure that Hamas probably would starve children simply to be able to make sure the world could see starving children, even if there's enough food there.
Well, they are very happy for the deaths of their own people, or maybe they're not even their own people, but they would see as their own people to be used for propaganda purposes, and that has happened consistently throughout this, so I can't disagree with that at all. Jonathan, thank you for your patience today as well. That's Jonathan Sacerdoti, the journalist and broadcaster.